Good morning, everybody. I'm Jeff Houch with the State University's retirement system. First of all, let me apologize for running a little bit late, and I apologize to Brenda for inadvertently interrupting her presentation. As you can imagine, it's been a pretty chaotic few weeks for us over at SURS. As Brenda so eloquently put earlier, you know, it's not that we weren't expecting this to happen, we just were surprised at the timing of it. In fact, I was actually on my honeymoon when the bill was passed, so I was racking up the long distance calls from the island of St. Martin, and basically ruined the last half of the vacation for my new wife, and I'm still working my way out of that. So what I want to do first is I want to make this quick, concise, and clear, because a lot of the questions that were provided to me in advance, I think I can clear up with just a brief explanation of how certain things work. So I'm going to start out at the 35,000-foot view, and then we can I want to leave a lot of time open for questions. I would also ask all questions wait until I'm finished. And of course, a lot of questions that Brenda addressed deal with what's going to happen at the courts, the constitutionality. Since SURS is named as a defendant in multiple lawsuits, it's inappropriate for us to really comment other than the basic facts. And also, for those that are near retirement, rather than fire up a lot of questions about specific examples, how their benefit's going to be reduced, I would encourage folks that are near retirement to reach out to one of our benefit counselors, because they're really the most appropriate folks to answer these type of questions. As Brenda mentioned, because they did it in such a short time period and baked in all these different components, there's certain questions you may ask that we still haven't issued our firm interpretation on. And of course, this is for guidance. Please, nobody base decisions upon, or I'm not allowed to give advice, so just keep that in mind. As Brenda mentioned, the official effective date of this bill is June 1, 2014, but certain things have an effective date of July 1, such as the change in the effective rate of interest, the employee contribution decrease, the retirement age change, as well as funding provisions. And the automatic annual increase, the new rate actually begins January 1, 2015. And then, of course, there's an optional defined contribution plan made available to certain eligible Tier 1 members. That cannot take effect earlier than July 1, 2015. And in fact, technically it's tied to a date at which the federal government approves such plan. I think the change in the automatic annual increase, not only is it the most financially, or not only is it the most impactful on the financial side, but it also impacts most of, this component has the most impact on our members. This does apply to folks who have already retired, as well as, of course, those that have not yet retired. This doesn't affect those that are Tier 2 members in the system, or those that first became members on or after January 1, 2011. So as I mentioned, the new increase, so everybody's gonna get their increase under the status quo for this year. It doesn't take effect until next January. And just for review, the current automatic annual increase rate is 3% of the previous year's retirement annuity, or as we like to call it, 3% with compounding interest. So the new rate, beginning January 1, 2015, and each year thereafter, we're going to look at your years of service. Now there seems to be some confusion out there that, say for example, I have 50 years of service, I'm only entitled to a certain amount as it relates to calculating this new automatic annual increase. There is no cap. So if I have 50 years of service, that 50 years of service, that number 50 is going to be used to calculate my new automatic annual increase. So what we do, So we take your years of service, multiply it by $1,000. So if I have 25 years of service, multiplied by 1,000, that's 25,000. We then take 3% of that. If there's a few math professors out there, they may correct me, but I believe that to be $750. So your increase in that first year, your pension is going to increase by $750. And essentially, you're going to receive an increase similar to that each year thereafter. Now, the one thing to remember is that $1,000 we're multiplying by your years of service, that amount is actually going to grow annually with the full CPI. So, in essence, you are going to get a slight, true automatic increase each year, but essentially, how I try and remember this is each year I'm going to get a raise of $750. But of course, that amount's going to increase slightly because we're indexing it to the Consumer Price Index. That CPI that I was telling you about, that rate's going to be provided by the Illinois Department of Insurance. They'll provide that to the system each year by November 1st. Now, here's where it gets a little tricky. And it's also important to remember that the component I just described only applies to those already retired. So, for those folks that are already retired, that's the only change you're subject to under this law. Well, they also changed the automatic annual increase by providing a skipping component, or as I'm calling it, automatic biannual increase. So depending on your age, as of the effective date, which is technically June 1st, 2014, so if I'm age 50 or older, then I'm going to go a 2-year period where I only get one annual increase. And then after that period concludes, I'll resume receiving increases. For those between ages 47 and 50, there's going to be a 6-year period where you only get three years of increases. For those 44 to 47, you're going to go 8 years where you get 4 increases. And then folks like myself, who are under age 44, we're going to go 10 years where we only receive 5 increases. It's also important to mention that this period that I'm talking about is the period immediately following your retirement date. Obviously, another big, or a component with a lot of interest is they did increase the retirement age. For those of the folks in the room who are 46 or older on the effective date, you're not subject to any delay. But as the ages decrease, so if I'm age 45 on the effective date, I have to work an additional 4 months in order to be eligible to retire. And each year I progress down, we add, or another 4 months is added to when you can retire. So folks that are younger than age 32, as of the effective date, full disclosure, that is myself, I'm going to have to work 5 additional years, or 6 months, for me to begin collecting a retirement annuity. We've received a lot of questions, or I should say there's a lot of questions as it relates to the Tier 1 earnings cap that was applied under this bill. And this is another component that's effective June 1st, 2014. So, do I have any Tier 2 members in the room? Probably.
What's a Tier 2 member?
Yeah.
A Tier 2 member is somebody who first begins employment on or after January 1, 2011. So first becomes a member of the SURS systems on or after that date. So with that particular plan provision, there was a cap put in place for such members. And as of calendar year 14, the cap was just over $110,000. Now that amount increases each year at a rate equal to 1/2 the increase in the CPI. So essentially what they've done is they've applied the same cap to Tier 1 non-retired folks. However, let's say I'm earning more than that amount as of the effective date. Well, then my cap will actually be equal to my annualized rate of earnings as of that date. And then for those folks that are currently covered under an active collective bargaining agreement, or I should say a bargaining agreement or an employment contract in effect as of June 1st, 2014, you're essentially held harmless or exempt or grandfathered, whatever you want to call it, until that agreement or contract is expired, renewed, or amended. And then when any of those dates occur, my cap is actually my annualized rate of earnings as of June 1st, as of the date that event occurs. With the law, one of the things Brenda mentioned, there's certain things that need to be fixed in the law, or I should say that weren't made clear when it passed. And that includes, what is the definition of annualized rate of earnings? Well, the intent, we believe, was the amount that a member can expect to earn over a 12-month period as of that date. But there's some wiggle room in how we craft a rule to define this, that we may base it upon the academic year, or calendar year, or fiscal year. But that's one of those details that, as I mentioned in the second slide, we're still working on, that we still haven't come to a firm interpretation. But due to the way it was provided in statute, there is a lot of flexibility on determining that rate. Another big change that's really unique only to our system as well as the teachers' retirement system is they've fixed a rate of interest that we refer to as the effective rate of interest within SURS. And we use this rate for many benefit purposes, including applying interest annually to money purchase accounts, calculating refunds for those portable plan members that terminate service, portable plan members that choose to take a lump sum payout at retirement versus an annuity, service credit purchases, calculating excess contributions, so on and so forth. So for all these benefit purposes, this rate is now fixed as opposed to being determined by the board annually based upon a formula. So moving forward, let's say for example fiscal year 14, for fiscal year 15, which begins in July, we're to take the 30-year U.S. Treasury bond rate plus 75 basis points, and whatever that rate is what the effective rate will be for that entire fiscal year. The most recent Treasury bond rate that I'll quote as of January 8th was 3.9%, or 390 basis points. So under the new formula, we take that, add 75 basis points, or 0.75, we get to 4.65. As you can see, for the purposes of applying the annual rate, or interest annually to money purchase, which is currently determined by the comptroller, the rate for the current fiscal year is 6.75%, and then for all other purposes under our article, the board determines it, it's currently 7%. Speaking of money purchase, they make a pretty significant change into how money purchase benefits are calculated moving forward. So today when we annuitize a money purchase account, or calculate the amount, or the retirement annuity payments from such account, we consider several factors, including obviously the amount of money in that account, the member's age, the member's projected mortality rate, but we also factor in an interest rate. We do assume that that money in that account will grow annually at an interest rate. And currently we use the prescribed rate of interest, which also reflects our long-term assumption of investment returns, which is 7 3/4, 775 basis points. So we transition from that rate to the new rate that I just described, the Treasury bond rate plus 75 basis points. And obviously it's going to produce a much lower annuity amount, because the lower the ERI, the smaller annuity payment will be, because we're not assuming that money will grow at a higher rate. One thing I will mention is we experienced a similar change a few years ago when the rate for annuitization factors of money purchase was reduced when the board lowered its return on investment assumption, and went from 8.5 to 7 3/4. There was actually a significant increase in retirements. I think for that fiscal year, we experienced 1,500 more retirements than average. I think on average we see about 3,000 people retire annually, or I should say in a given fiscal year. We saw about 4,500 that year. So the legislature was aware that changing this rate in the significant way in which they changed can and probably will encourage folks to retire before the effective date of that change. So they provided a minimum guarantee. Essentially, if you're eligible to retire as of fiscal year 13, which fiscal year 13 ended June 30th, 2013, if you're eligible to retire on that date, essentially you're guaranteed the benefit you would have received had you retired on that date, even if you continue to work past that date. However, what this doesn't include is it doesn't include future interest accruals on the money in your money purchase account, nor does it include prospective contributions, or I should say future contributions into that account. So it remains to be seen what type of impact this will truly have on increase in retirement. So I mentioned this earlier. In Senate Bill 1, or Public Act 98-599, they provided this optional defined contribution plan for a certain portion of our Tier 1 active members. Essentially, for all of our current active Tier 1 members, which there's about 70,000 of, 5% of those will have the option to elect into this optional defined contribution plan. If you make this election, your defined benefit plan is frozen as of the date you migrate to the optional defined contribution plan, and essentially you'll receive two benefits. Now, I said we've got about, I think I said this, but if I didn't, I need to re-emphasize it. There's about 70,000 active Tier 1 members, so that would translate to about 3,000 folks being eligible to opt into this optional defined contribution plan. And just for review, we have a defined contribution plan already today. It was available to many of us when we began employment. This plan will look very similar to that, with a couple key exceptions. For one, folks under the current self-managed plan receive a 7.6% match from the state. Well, for folks that opt into this optional defined contribution plan, you're only guaranteed a match of 3%. And it can be recalculated by the state depending on whether or not the state actuary essentially what they're going to do is they're going to look at the demographic in that plan and say, what does the rate need to be per member so that the state maintains cost neutrality. Because if you talk to any actuary, when you allow a certain portion of a defined benefit population to opt out of the defined benefit plan and into a defined contribution plan, it's actually going to increase the plan sponsor's costs in the short term, because you're losing all that money of member contributions that could have been made to the defined benefit plan. So essentially, all we can really tell members is you're guaranteed a match of 3%. It can't exceed the employer share of normal cost for the defined benefit plan, which for fiscal year 14 is about 11.2%. So essentially you're going to be in a range, and that rate can change annually, which it's going to be very difficult. I would say for myself, it would be very difficult for me to make such election with that type of uncertainty. That might be my last slide. Actually, that's why I'm not able to click. One other thing I will comment about as it relates to the optional defined contribution plan is that obviously there are fees associated with these types of plans. I think the annual fees just at the SURS level alone for our self-managed plan total about $400,000 each year. So in order for the state to maintain cost neutrality as it relates to this optional defined contribution plan, all the administrative fees are going to be borne by those 3,000 members opting into the plan. So essentially, let's just assume your match is going to match from the employer, or I should say the state is going to be 3%. You're also, a member would be putting in 7%. Because we've also, or I should say this bill also reduces Tier 1 contributions from 8% to 7%. So a member will put in 7%, receive a match at 10%. That may not all go to your account. That may be reduced by an amount to pay for the admin fees associated with the plan. That, in a nutshell, as you notice, the title of my presentation was in a nutshell. That is the 35,000-foot view of this bill. I tried to incorporate into my presentation ways in which some of the questions were provided to me in advance were answered. But obviously, Brenda and I are happy to take questions at this time. But before I do that, there's a common theme of questions that I'll address before we open it up for questions. So, a lot of people wanted to know, well, should I retire before the effective date? What are the pros and cons of retiring before the effective date of this law? Obviously, I'm not here to give advice to people on what they should or should not do, but I just want to kind of provide some facts. So obviously, for those that retire before the effective date, the only change that you're subject to is that new formula used to determine automatic annual increases. For those that are Tier 1 members that have not yet retired, you're subject to all these other changes that I've just talked about, including, well, assuming you're, certain ages, like if you're over 46, you're not subject to the increased age, but you'll be subject to the AAI skipping, retirement age increase. You'll also get contribute at a lower rate, but and as well as the changes to the effective rate of interest. That seemed to be a common question that I received, so hopefully that kind of clears things up. And then another question I received before I turn it over to you that I want to address is a lot of people wanted to know how these plan design changes affect portable plan members. And full disclosure, I'm a portable plan member, and just for review, essentially portable plan is similar to the traditional plan with two key exceptions. Portable plan members get a more generous refund when they terminate service if they so choose a refund, and that they are eligible, if they have enough years of service, for an employer match on what they put in, plus they get interest at the effective rate of interest. Portable plan members also have the ability to take a lump sum payout at retirement. And finally, so that sounds like a nice plan, right? Well, the trade-off is compared to the traditional plan, if I'm to provide a survivor annuity to a survivor and I'm a portable plan member, I have to reduce my retirement annuity actuarially reduce my retirement annuity in order to provide that survivor's annuity, I'm sorry. So I guess the big question, or I should say the question that I will answer that I received a lot of is how are portable plan members impacted by Senate Bill 1? Well, all these changes I've just described apply to those members, but in addition, a big reason as why somebody may take or may elect the portable plan, the termination refund, the interest rate in which your refund essentially will probably be less than what it would have been as a result of the change in the effective rate of interest. So with that being said,
Thank you, Jeff.